shortages could hit Europe by September. The warning has set off alarm bells, with G7 finance and energy ministers alongside central bank governors meeting virtually on Monday to assess the impact. In Brussels, EU agriculture ministers are also holding talks.
There is a growing unrest among our farmers because the prices of fertilizers and also the prices of energy is growing now very rapidly.
Solutions may take time. For now, unless fertilizer starts moving soon, the strain on food production is likely to show up on supermarket shelves before long. Milena Veselinovic, Al Jazeera.
Well, as governments grapple with what to do about all this, the German Chancellor has warned the economic fallout of the conflict in Iran could have a lasting impact.
If the war escalates into a major regional conflict, it could place an even greater burden on Germany and Europe, as heavy as the one we last experienced during the COVID pandemic or the start of the war in Ukraine.
Well, joining us now here in the studio is commodities consultant Kona Hack. She's formerly the head of research at global trading firm ED&F Commodities. Great to have you with us. So government's nervous, clearly. A double shock for farmers, higher prices, higher fertilizer prices and fuel prices, of course. Meanwhile, the market generally and globally looks like it's pricing in bad news at the moment rather than the sort of optimism that the markets were showing perhaps a week ago.
Yeah, we're into our second month of the war now, and there's no sign of de-escalation. Despite a lot of the mixed messaging that's coming out of the USA, what you're actually seeing on the ground is, unfortunately, escalation. So there's no freeing up of the critical home strait, where 30 to 40% of the world's fertilizers, energy, you name it, critical commodities are being choked at that point. This has massive ramifications for the world and for the world financial markets. I mean, today what we're seeing is an energy shock like we haven't seen in decades. Possibly, I would say, one of the worst we've ever seen in our lives, I'd say. And I think the ramifications for this, even though as a world we are less energy intensive than we were, we're nowhere near, we've not weaned ourselves off energy, unfortunately. So whether it's petrol, whether it's gasoline, diesel, fossil fuels is still something we very much rely on. We're at the transition phase where we would like to be moving away into renewables, which arguably is less impacted by such wars, but we're not there yet. And
we're not there yet, still a way to go. Analysts talk about a price shock that is greater perhaps than the 70s oil price shocks and the gas price shock of the 2022 war in Ukraine put together. Look, stay with us. Let's dig a little deeper into this, because we'll take a closer look now at food production here in the UK and how it's vulnerable to global supply chain shocks. Because even though the UK grows and produces more than 60% of its own food, it is highly dependent on imports of fruit and vegetables. 84% of its fruit and 47% of its vegetables are sourced from other countries. Plus, in January, 12% of UK households, that's around 6.3 million adults, experienced food insecurity. That is when someone can't reliably access.
Israel has been continuously in a state of war since October 2023. That's why the budget has a sharp increase of $10 billion for military and defense spending. This also signals Israel's intention to maintain the state of war despite attempts to de-escalate tension in the region. Despite multiple wars, corruption charges and failure to prevent October 7th attacks, Netanyahu's government is expected to be one of the few Israeli governments to complete its term in full, and some even expected to last even beyond. The continuation of the war serves Netanyahu's coalition and could even raise his chances of winning elections later this year. But all of this depends on how the war unfolds in Iran and Lebanon. On Monday, a joint and simultaneous attack from Iran and Hezbollah hit Israel's oil refinery site in Haifa on Monday. A fuel tanker and an industrial building were reportedly damaged. It's unclear if this was from missiles or debris from interceptions. This is the second attack on Israel's most critical energy facility since the war in Iran began. Attacks like these may increase the pressure on the government and the coalition, but Monday's budget vote also shows how divided Netanyahu's opponents are. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
Here's a reminder of our top story this hour. In an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says President Donald Trump prefers diplomacy over military escalation with Iran. Rubio also stressed that Tehran will face severe consequences if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened.
There's messages and some direct talks going on between some inside of Iran and the United States, primarily through intermediaries, but there's been some conversation. And I think the president always prefers diplomacy, always prefers an outcome. And we could have done this before. I mean, imagine an Iranian regime who, instead of spending billions of dollars supporting terrorist groups and building up all of these weapons, had invested that money into Iran for the people of Iran.
Want to condemn to what they've described as heinous attacks on Kuwait. One Indian national was killed in an attack on a power and water desalination plant earlier on Monday. This brings Kuwait's death toll to 7 in the conflict. Iran's denied carrying out the attack and says it's a false flag operation by Israel. Okay, let's cross over to London now, and my colleague Jonah Holt for a closer look at how the war is affecting the global financial markets.
Hello there and welcome back to Al Jazeera's studio here in London. Well, let's begin with European shares because they've edged higher on Monday, only just though because the spectre of a drawn-out conflict continues to overshadow sentiment. Oil is now trading at $113 a barrel. That means rising costs for other industries reliant on fuel like farming. 30% of the world's fertilizer normally travels through the Strait of Hormuz, but that's remained closed to most maritime traffic. So for farmers, it's creating a double shock: higher diesel prices, which make it more expensive to run machinery, and the higher cost of fertilizer, all just as the spring planting season gets underway. Milena Veselinovic reports now.
The man behind the bill is far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. He's seen celebrating with a bottle of champagne inside the chamber. The bill has drawn criticism from the foreign ministers of Germany, the Netherlands, France, Italy and the United Kingdom. While the law comes into effect in 30 days, the legislation could still be struck down by the Supreme Court. Nor it is following developments in Israel from near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nor, I think it's fair to say, it is very rare, extremely rare, in any kind of democracy for the death penalty to actually be imposed rather than repealed. Yet, here we are, Noah.
Yeah, and it's imposed not on anyone convicted of the crime of killing, of murder. It is imposed on a specific group, and hence the discriminatory part of it, Neve. Now, this law has been the subject of much debate since it was first legislated, and I have to say that it wasn't just proposed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. He had support even from the opposition, so there is no point of principled opposition to this law. Some of the objections we heard during the discussions had to do with technicalities, with political points and scoring points, like Benny Gantz, for example, a former minister of defense and a prominent opposition figure who objected to this bill, not because he opposed killing Palestinians, because in his words, I've killed more Palestinian so-called terrorists than all the members in the plenum today, but his point of objection was that this would be helping Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, this law will be challenged in Israel's High Court. Human rights organizations and 2 Palestinian-Israeli parliamentary blocs will be challenging this law. But the fact that it passed, the fact that the Israeli Prime Minister voted in favor of it despite international objections, the fact that the discussion around it was not about discrimination, was not about the fact that 88 Palestinians have already died because of torture and abuse since October 2023, and that the conditions of starvation and abuse have been mainstreamed and normalized, almost institutionalized. That is what is so concerning to human rights its organizations. That's why we're hearing from capitals in the European Union. We're hearing calls for suspending the partnership agreement with Israel, for sanctioning Israel even because of it. And we're also hearing from the UN about this, from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty actually calling for its repeal. It is an unprecedented kind of law, and it does reflect the moment in which Israel finds itself, the political atmosphere in which Israel finds itself, not in the right, in the far right, Niamh, where abuse and dehumanization of Palestinians is simply one more thing to say.
Sounds like an extraordinary moment. Nora, many thanks. Nora there covering developments from near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Now, the Israeli parliament also passed its budget early on Monday after 13 hours of deliberations, including delays by the opposition and interruptions from sirens. It's Israel's largest budget and includes a big chunk for military and security spending and keeps Netanyahu's government in power until elections later this year. Ida Ibrahim reports from the occupied West Bank.
It's the largest spending budget in Israel's history. With $271 billion, the bill gives another lifeline for Benjamin Netanyahu's government for a few months. Delayed by the opposition and interrupted by sirens warning of incoming Iranian missiles, the passing of the budget averted early elections. A test for the government, since the latest polls suggest Netanyahu's coalition could lose if elections were held now.
Too much egos between the different parties of the opposition, so they were unable to stop or to change or to at least amend parts of the budget. And this does not only tell us about the coalition, it tells us a lot about the opposition in Israel.
The ultra-Orthodox religious parties, members of Netanyahu's governing coalition, voted in favor of the budget, even though they didn't get their long-term demand, a law to give their members a blanket exemption from military service, perhaps because the bill increased money allocated for their institution.